Ah, man. Well, Ravens flock, I told you I was going to do it. It's time to start the discussion. We need to talk about this. We've seen how the season's been going so far. We got plenty of football left, but we've seen what this team has done so far. Based on the 12 games they've played, we are going to answer the question, are the Ravens a legitimate Super Bowl contending team? Let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. Woo! So, Ravens flock, how are you guys doing today? Hopefully everybody's enjoying their day. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the bye week because we couldn't have asked for a better bye week. The Chiefs lost, the Jaguars lost, the Browns lost, and the Steelers lost. So not only do we have cushion in the AFC North, but now we're looking up in the standings, and the only team that's currently in our way for the number one seed in the AFC is the Miami Dolphins. Thankfully, we get to play them on New Year's Eve, so hopefully we can break the tiebreaker there, assuming both teams have the same record by that point. But yeah, the Ravens come out of their bye week with a record of 9-3. They are first place in the AFC North, and they are tied for first place with the Miami Dolphins at 9-3 for the number one seed in the AFC. We've got a bunch of games coming up that's truly going to test the Ravens. The last 5 games of this season for the Ravens, they are facing off against an opponent that has a record of 500 or better. So this is easily the toughest stretch of the season for the Ravens, and we're going to get a good assessment of what this Ravens team is capable of just before the playoffs get started. So we'll see how this Ravens team fares, because you got teams like the Dolphins, teams like the Niners you got to deal with, and of course you got to deal with Jacksonville, though we don't know how Trevor Lawrence is going to we don't know how that Trevor Lawrence effect is going to play, because he may be able to play, he may not. He's trying to play this week. We don't know if he will be. But if he doesn't play this week, he may end up playing in that game against us. So we'll just have to wait and see in regard to that. But we're not here to talk about the upcoming games. We're here to discuss what's already happened. We have 12 games the Ravens have played already. And based off of those 12 games, we can get a pretty good assessment as to what the Ravens are and decide whether or not they are a Super Bowl contending team. Now, of course, many people may be clicking on this and saying, why is this even a question? They're a 9-3 football team. They're battling for the number one seed in the AFC. They've got a top 5 defense and a top 10 offense. Why would you ask whether or not they are a Super Bowl contending team? Shouldn't this be simple? Well, yes and no. See, the Ravens they are a very unique team when it comes to how they choose to approach things in the NFL. They're a team that chooses to zig while everyone zags. They like to do things their way and their way only. And it can lead to some very conflicting results. If you're a Ravens fan, you've seen the highs and the lows of what this team is capable of. And honestly, it can be very dangerous and it can be concerning. That's why we're asking this question in the first place. So like I already said, the Ravens do boast a top 10 offense and a top 5 defense. Their defense is ranked second in total yards and passing yards given up per game. And they're within the top 10 in terms of total yards rushing and rushing yards per game given up. However, they still remain number 1 in terms of points per game given up and total points given up the entire season. So they're the number 1 scoring defense in the NFL. And in terms of overall defense, they would rank second place in a lot of stats. I think Cleveland still got the edge on them there. Overall, they are considered a top 5 defense. Hell, they're considered a top 3 defense. One can argue they're the best defense in football, but that's a different conversation. So you've got a top five defense, right? And then you look at the other side of the offense, and you see they rank 7th in total yards and yards per game. They're the number 1 rushing attack in football, so they're number 1 in total rushing yards and rushing yards per game. They're around 20th for passing yards and total passing yards. It is what it is. It's kind of always been like that, similar to the MVP season. The passing yards aspect of the Ravens offense is never going to be seen within the top 10, because that's not how the Ravens want to play football. Like I say, they zig when everyone zags. They want the running game to dominate what they do offensively. The passing game is just an aspect they want to be a little bit more balanced and an aspect that they can rely on down the stretch. Which so far this season, one can say it has been there and has been consistent enough to trust. But when we get into the games, we'll discuss that aspect. So, you have a top 7 offense and then you have a top 3 defense, if we're just going off of the statistics, that should be the recipe to a team that can get to the Super Bowl. That should be a recipe for a team that should undoubtedly be considered a Super Bowl contending team. However, when you take a look at the games themselves, it tells a little bit of a story here. Now, it doesn't push the narrative that the Ravens shouldn't be a contending team or there's no reason they should even be considered a Super Bowl contending team. It doesn't do that. However, it does leave some question marks, and it does make you question whether or not they are a fully legitimate Super Bowl contending team. I'll get into that. So, the Ravens so far this season, they have played 12 games of football. They have a record of 9-3, but they have played 12 games of football. Now, in those games, we have seen a lot from the Ravens. We've seen some positives, we've seen some negatives. And based on what we've seen, it has been a very questionable thing if you look at it. The number one thing I will say about the Ravens, in every single game they've played, they've had a lead. In every single game they've played, they've had a lead heading into the fourth quarter. Be it a 1-point lead, a double-digit lead, whatever you want to say. The Ravens have entered every fourth quarter with some type of lead, yet they sit here at 9-3. Now, when you take a look at who they have won against, you'll see in week 1, they took on C.J. Stroud and the Houston Texans, got the win there. Granted, that was the rookie's first game, and obviously we've seen C.J. Stroud get very comfortable since then, so I don't know how the Ravens would fare against that Texans team if they were to face off against them in the playoffs. I still think the Ravens personally would be able to win that matchup, but I don't think it's going to be a 25-9 outcome. I think it'll be a lot closer than people would expect. Then in week 2, you saw them take on the Cincinnati Bengals, and Joe Burrow that was dealing with a calf injury. Now, granted, I will say this, the calf injury was not affecting him for a majority of that game. It wasn't until the last time he went on the field, was the last possession that the Bengals had, when he threw a touchdown pass. That's where we saw the injury bother him. So he did not come on the field again because the Ravens got the ball and they killed the clock. Lamar got it done. But that final possession, we saw Joe Burrow re-injure his calf. But prior to that, for most of the game, he pretty much was showing no signs that calf slowing him down or impacting him for the most part. But again, he was off to a slow start. Either way, the Ravens were able to get the victory there. Then they go on to week 3 against the Colts in an overtime game that probably shouldn't have gone to overtime. Again, the Ravens were leading, but due to several key mistakes on special teams and the offense going completely cold in overtime, the Ravens ultimately did lose that game by 3. Then you got week 4 against the Browns. They were able to dominate that Browns team. However, we do have to note it was the rookie DTR that was the quarterback and not Deshaun Watson. The Ravens were able to dominate them, and Lamar Jackson was able to do whatever he wanted against that Browns defense the first time he saw them. So that was a good sign of what they're able to do and what they're capable of offensively, because at that point, the Browns were the number 1 defense in football. And still, they are technically considered statistical-wise the number 1 defense in football. Though the Ravens are right there, as well as the Niners and teams like the Chiefs and the Cowboys and so on and so forth. Then after that, they went to Pittsburgh to take on the Steelers in one of the most frustrating games we've seen from the Ravens all season. A game where the receivers just could not catch the football. 8 drops happened in that game. 3 of those were for touchdowns. Such a frustrating game, but it showcases what the Ravens look like when everything is not working. Because down the stretch, come fourth quarter, that offense could not respond. They got a golden opportunity on a special teams recovery from a muff punt, and well, not muff punt, but a fumble on a kick return. They got down to the goal line because of that, and Lamar Jackson threw an interception because he tried to force the ball on a fade route to Odell. Steelers get the ball. They go down the field. George Pickens gets the best of Marlon Humphrey, who did come back from injury. That was his first game of the season. But he got the best of Marlon Humphrey, took it for a touchdown. They take the lead. Ravens got the ball back twice after the Steelers took the lead, and it resulted in a strip fumble and a fourth down stop. So once again, the Ravens offense was not able to really respond in that situation, and it wasn't a great look for them. So that was a bad loss there. That's their second loss of the season. From there, the Ravens go on a 4-game winning streak. They take on the Titans in London in what was a bit of a gritty game. Wasn't the prettiest game from the Ravens offensively again. And defensively, there was some mistakes there that you just didn't like. So it was a game that was much closer than it needed to be. But still, it was a win nevertheless. However, you still had more question marks regarding the Ravens. And at that point, people didn't really see the Ravens as a contending team. I will definitely say, so far, through 6 games, they do not look like a contending team. But things started to change a little based on what happens within the next 3 weeks. They take on the red-hot Detroit Lions. They come to Baltimore. The Lions are red-hot. They look like a contending team. They're fighting for the number 1 seed in the NFC. And it seems like they're going to come here and make this a very difficult game for the Ravens. The Ravens responded by putting up their best offensive performance of the season, and they absolutely dominated the Lions. Offensively, they had 38 points. Defensively, they gave up 6. I mean, it was a complete and utter beatdown. The Ravens showcased what they're capable of when they're playing at the highest level and everything's clicking on all cylinders. So that was a statement game for the Ravens. The following week, they took on the Cardinals. It was a bit of a messy game. Wasn't as great offensively. There was some issues there. But the offense was able to find a way to put up 30 points. Once again, they were able to get the win. A bit of a mess from the defensive aspect and special teams aspect in the fourth quarter. But overall, the Ravens were able to get the victory there and continue their win streak to 3. Then they come back to Baltimore to take on the Seahawks team that was red hot at the time. That Seahawks team was looking nice. They were actually fighting with the Niners at that point to try to get the divisional lead. So them coming to Baltimore was a big game. And once again, the Ravens showcase what they're capable of because they absolutely dominated the Seattle Seahawks. They beat them down 37-3. It was a complete and utter dominance. It was the 3rd straight game in which the Ravens were able to put up 30-plus points in a football game. And all of a sudden, it looked like the Ravens were starting to find their groove. The offense was starting to look the way we expected it to look. The defense continued to ball out. And now they've beaten 2 teams that were red hot, that were competing for not only a divisional title, but trying to compete for a higher seeding in the NFC. Now, after this, the outlook for the Ravens is they're starting to look like a contending team. But we have to see how this is going to go moving forward. Then you get the game in Baltimore against the divisional rival in the Cleveland Browns. This time, Cleveland has their starting quarterback in Deshaun Watson. In a game that started off quickly, Baltimore was able to take the early lead with a pick 6 on the very first pass of Deshaun Watson. Kyle Hamilton pick 6 it, took it to the house. The Ravens also got the ball offensively, and Keith Mitchell took it the distance for a rushing touchdown. All of a sudden, they're up 14-0, and it looks like the Ravens are about to dominate for yet another game. But Cleveland fought back, kept the game close, and made it competitive. We get to the fourth quarter, and we see the Ravens found a way to get themselves a 14-point lead thanks to a muff punt by James Prochet. So they get a 14-point lead. They're up 31-17 in the fourth quarter. And then, just like we've seen before so far this season, in the fourth quarter, the Ravens offense proceeds to do absolutely nothing. They go cold. To make matters worse, they're turning the ball over again, just like they did in the Steelers game where the offense did nothing and they started turning the ball over. So we started seeing turnovers happening in a situation where we saw Lamar Jackson, his pass get deflected and picked off for a pick 6. And then all of a sudden the offense couldn't do anything while the defense couldn't stop Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson in the second half of that game did not have a single incompletion. It was the best game he has had as a Cleveland Brown. And he helped pull off the upset against the Ravens. That was a game that showcased some of the negative aspects of the Ravens. The fourth quarter which has been a problem for them all season. All of a sudden, the offense does nothing, defense can't make a stop, and turnovers happen. Unfortunate. So that game happens, and then they have a quick turnaround to play a Thursday night football game against the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow is there. They were starting to get things going. They were fighting for a playoff spot. They were actually hot coming into this game, but they did suffer a tough loss against the Houston Texans team that, again, has also been playing well. So they were looking to get back on track, win this game, and put themselves in a good position to try and get this playoff push. Unfortunately, this game turned messy real quick. This was the game where we lost to Mark Andrews and the Bengals lost Joe Burrow. Both those guys are seen as out for the season, though the Ravens are still keeping up hope that Mark Andrews could return at some point, maybe in the playoffs if the Ravens are able to go on a deep run. But for now, he's gone. He's not coming back. Meanwhile, the Bengals did lose Joe Burrow, which completely collapsed them, and the Ravens were able to take advantage of that. They got the win, won by double digits, handled business, and got that win. From there, they had 10 days off, where they would end up traveling to LA to take on the Chargers. In a game where the defense again was showcasing its dominance, the defense again was making stops, the defense again was forcing turnovers, and the offense, past one drive, did not really do much of anything and honestly struggled to get the ball moving. So we've seen in a lot of these games, the Ravens offense at times just goes cold. If they're not turning the ball over, they just go cold and they're doing little of nothing with the football. Meanwhile, the defense, for the most part, is balling out, except for one or two of these moments so far this season. Despite that, Ravens defense makes a stop late in the game. They get the ball back to the offense. Offense ices the game with a long touchdown run by rookie Zay Flowers. They get the 20-10 victory, and they head into their bye week at 9-3. So, going through each and every individual game, we've seen some positives and some negatives. One thing we've seen that's positive is the Ravens, when their offense is on point, when they're in rhythm, they are very difficult to stop. They are able to put up 30-plus points on any team when their offense is clicking. As for the defense, throughout the season, they have been dominating. Even in the games where they've suffered some losses, they've played well enough defensively to help their team win, except for one game, and that would be the Browns game, where they didn't really do a great job defensively. But in the Steelers loss, they gave up 15 points. Because I believe, two of them were maybe a safety, because it was a blocked punt. So in the Steelers game, they gave up 15 points. In the Colts game, they ended up giving up 22. But it was really a situation where it was 16 points that were given up. But due to the mistakes of the Ravens special teams and the offense not doing anything, it ended up becoming 22. Either way, the defense for much of this season has done their job. The defense for much of this season has put the Ravens offense in position to win. The defense for much of this season has been dominant and has gotten the job done. That's why they're leading the league in sacks, which is another aspect that showcases their dominance. It showcases how great their defense has been. Their secondary has been amazing. You got this safety duo here with Hamilton and Geno Stone. Both of them are playing like Pro Bowlers. Both of them have been balling out this season. You got Marlon Humphrey still doing his thing. And to the opposite side of him, Brandon Stevens, who's having a career year. You got a guy in Matabike who's also having a career year. He's got double-digit sacks. You see Clowney, the reemergence of Clowney. He's having a great year. You look at our linebacking duo with Patrick Queen and, and Roquan Smith. Those guys are doing their thing. Both of them are having an amazing year. The defense as a whole has been consistently great. They've been balling out, and they've been doing their thing. So that's a positive aspect. Negative aspect really has to deal with the offense. If there's anything we got to point to in a negative aspect, it's the offense. Sure, the defense at times has made some mistakes here and there, like we saw with the Steelers game where that touchdown was given up on Marlon Humphrey, or like we saw against the Browns where the defense just couldn't make a stop against Deshaun Watson. Again, defense, there's going to be times where the defense is going to have situations like that. You just hope it's not on a consistent basis. And thankfully for the Ravens defense, it has not been on a consistent basis. So there's not a lot of negative aspects to look at when it comes to Ravens defense. The offense, however, there's a lot of negative aspects to look at when it comes to the offense. They have not been great in fourth quarters this season. The Ravens offense in the fourth quarter has not been great this season, and it's the biggest aspect that has held them back. The Ravens' inability to do anything against the Colts in the fourth quarter down the stretch ultimately put them in the position that they were in to lose that game. Even though there was a penalty that could have been called, if the Ravens offense was more consistent and was able to get some plays going early on during that time, they would have been fine. The Ravens offense putting up 0 points in the second half after going up 10-0 makes it look really bad. In that fourth quarter where your offense did nothing but turn the ball over and get stopped does not look good. 2 turnovers and then a turnover on downs to end the game. That is not a great look for your offense. And then again in Cleveland, you get a pick 6. And then your offense goes cold and does nothing. After scoring that touchdown early on in the fourth quarter, they proceed to do nothing for the rest of the game. They've had opportunities to stop the bleeding, and the offense is not able to make a response. So if there's any negative aspect we can look at when it comes to the Ravens, it would be the offense. The biggest positive aspect of the Ravens is their defense. This is a top 3 defense, arguably the best defense in football. But a negative aspect we've seen from the Ravens is their offense, specifically when it comes to how their offense looks in the fourth quarter. This is a team that is able to dominate you for 3 quarters, but make enough mistakes in the fourth quarter to where you have a chance to potentially come back in the game. And that's why we've seen in some of these games, it's been a lot closer than it needs to be. They dominate for 3 quarters, and then in the fourth quarter, the offense goes AWOL. They start turning the ball over, or they're just not moving the ball at all, and they're forced to punt. They're not getting anything done. Part of it has to deal with them getting very conservative and trying to melt the clock down in order to just get away with that lead. But in this era, doing something like that is ultimately going to put the pressure on you because you start trying to melt the clock and all of a sudden you're being a little bit too conservative. You punt the football. Now your defense got to go out there tired because you went 3 and out because you were trying to be conservative. Then the offense of the opponent's going a long drive. You come back, you're still being conservative, and your defense has to come back out there again to try to make a stop, even though they're very tired because once again you went 3 and out. So the Ravens offense, their biggest issues is closing games in the fourth quarter. They're a team that can dominate for 3 quarters. After all, they are a top 10 offense. But that fourth quarter offense, where they're turning the ball over and doing nothing, that is the biggest aspect and the biggest weakness of this team. And we're going to get to see how that is going to showcase itself within these final 5 games. They had the time in the bye week to address it. Will it be fixed? We will find out. But based on what we've seen from these first 12 games, there are some serious concerns about how the offense looks in the fourth quarter. And until they can get that fixed, their chances to get to the Super Bowl will be majorly affected. Now, with that being said, do I think that weakness in the fourth quarter is going to stop the Ravens from getting to the Super Bowl? Yes and no. Yes, if it becomes a consistent issue. No, if it's able to be fixed within these next couple of games. Because the Ravens have won 9 games, and offensively, they've been able to close out down the stretch in some of these situations. They were able to do it against the Chargers, who were close to getting the football back, but they were able to get it done. They were able to get it done against the Titans in a game they really needed that was way too close and didn't really need to be that close. They were able to do it against the Cardinals. Granted, that's not a great team, but they were able to do it against the Cardinals. So we've seen that. And again, we've seen them perform well for 3 quarters and dominate. They dominated the Lions. They dominated the Seahawks. We see what they're able to do when they're hitting on all cylinders. The only concern is that fourth quarter. But I don't think it's too much of a concern to where you'll sit back and say they got no chance to compete come the playoff game. If they're in a playoff game and it's the fourth quarter and it's close, there would be some concerns. But I've seen them in some of these games be able to close out. The question is, can they do it consistently? Can they limit the turnovers? Can they get drives going in the fourth quarter? And can they close out games? That's the main question that needs to be answered. And we're going to figure that out within these next 5 games because these 5 games are going to truly test them. With that being said, we have to answer the question officially. Are the Ravens a legitimate Super Bowl contending team? My answer to that would be yes. The Baltimore Ravens are a legitimate Super Bowl contending team. When you have a top 7 offense and a top 3 defense, and you are winning a majority of your games, you're battling for the number 1 seed, you are absolutely considered a Super Bowl contending team without a doubt. However, due to that issue in the fourth quarter, I would tread caution with the Ravens in terms of fully saying they can go the distance. They're a Super Bowl contending team that you have concerns with in terms of how they perform in the fourth quarter. They got 5 games to showcase that they can fix this. If they don't have these issues down the stretch, that concern goes out the window. But if these issues continue to be there and it ends up costing them a couple games, such as a game against the Dolphins or the game against the Niners, then we will watch this team head into the playoffs with major questions as to whether or not they can close out games. That's their biggest aspect. They were leading in all 12 of these games. One can argue they should be 12-0. One can make that serious argument because they've led in every single one of these games heading into the fourth quarter. Yet you've lost 3 games because of how you played down the stretch. Your inability to close, your frequent turnover rate, and your defense not making stops in certain key situations. That's ultimately what's cost you in those 3 games. We've seen you be able to close out games, so we know you're capable of it. But can you do it on a consistent basis? That's where the question will come in. So I will sit back and say my final assessment is the Ravens are a legitimate Super Bowl contending team. However, you have to tread caution with putting your full-on belief and trust that they can go the distance and get to the Super Bowl until you see them fix those fourth quarter issues. If they can fix those fourth quarter issues, no doubt they will be a bona fide contending team with no concerns, no worries, basically little to no weaknesses, and honestly, they would be seen as the favorites. These next 5 games are going to determine what type of Ravens team we're going to see heading into the playoffs. With that being said, that's pretty much all I've got. This is something I knew I had to do. It was something that was on my mind for the last several weeks. You guys have definitely been asking me, do you think they're a Super Bowl contending team now? You think they're a Super Bowl contending team now? You've been asking me that for weeks. I feel I had to get this out now. I knew I was going to get it out just before this Rams game comes up. You know, I was going to spend this time just before we played our next game to do so. So, yep, here it is. I look at the Ravens and say they're a Super Bowl contending team, especially with how the AFC is looking right now. This is a prime opportunity for the Ravens. And if they're not able to take advantage of it, they can only blame themselves. So, yes, they are a contending team, but tread caution because the fourth quarter issues are a serious problem, and it could end up holding them back in the playoffs. If they can get those fixed within the next 5 games, because they certainly have the opponents that will test them out in the fourth quarter, if they can get this fixed within the next 5 games, then they can head into the playoffs with little to no concerns, and you could look at them as a team that can legit go the distance without any concerns because they're that great of a juggernaut team. But we'll just have to wait and see how things go. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. And with that being said, that's all I've got, and I'm out of here, man. Peace out.